The next step in our basic CMS is to create a basic CRUD process. So CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. So for our first CRUD example, we're going to use or create the ability to add, edit, delete, and view our users. So in our CMS, I'm going to create a new file called users. And this file will display our current users. So I'm just going to jump over to our dashboard and copy our header and all our asset files and change our title to users. So on this page, we're going to run a quick query to fetch all of our current users. And we'll just go select star from users, order by, go last, comma first. We will execute our query. Then we'll create a basic table. And I'm just going to throw a border on it. Ideally, that's done in our style sheets, but for now, we'll put it here. Okay, and we're going to have a handful of columns. We want to display our user name, first and last, our email address, and our status. So I'll have a column for first name, a column for last name, a column for email address, and status. And we need a column for our edit and delete buttons. So in our header, we can just leave that blank. So now in here, we're going to loop through our current records. We're going to grab each record as an array. And for each record, we're going to open up a new table row. And in here, we're going to have 5 cells, just like our first column. And our first one is our first name. Second one is our last name. Third one is our email address. Our status. Which is our active column. And then in our options column here, we want a link to edit this record. So we're going to link to a file called users_edit.php. And this file is going to need to know which record we want to edit. So I'm going to append the ID of the record to that link. And similar, our delete. Now our delete, we're not going to need a whole page for our delete users. We're just going to use the users page. So I'm going to link this to our users page. I'm going to pass a parameter called delete. And include our ID. And finally, at the very bottom, I'm going to create a link to our ad page. So if I save that and go back here and log in and click on Manage Users, all right, we get an error, and I just put the wrong variable in here. This should be my query variable. So let's save that and refresh. And again, I forgot my connection variable. Save that and refresh. And lastly, on line 33, it expects a result. So this line here, the error is telling me that this is not a valid MySQL result. So that typically means there's something wrong with my query. Select star from users, order by last, comma first. So let's bring up my database, look at my users, and see where did we go wrong. So select star from users, order by last, comma first. Now, if you don't see the problem right away, you can copy your query into MySQL, into PHPMyAdmin, and run it. And now we've got a problem. And here we're getting a better description. So the problem was this column here. That shouldn't be name. That is our first name column. And now if I go back to my CMS and refresh, there's our list. Right, so if I click add, that's not going to work yet. We haven't made that page. If I click edit, right, notice we go to our edit.php page, which we haven't made yet, and notice the ID of our record has been included. So that way, that informs the edit page which record to edit. And finally, if I click delete, it's loading our users page. It's passing a parameter called delete with the record that we want to delete. So to continue testing this out, let's first create our ad page. Then we can add some records, test out our deletes, and test out our edits, because I don't want to delete our Jane Doe record, or else I won't have a record to log in with. So we can close our files. And let's create a new file called users_add.php. All right, so I can jump back to my users file, grab my assets and my header, and change this to add user. And now we just need a basic form. So I'm going to add a form. And in here, I'm going to add a bunch of text boxes. So first name. Last name. Email address. Then we need our password. And then finally our status. Now for our status, we need a drop-down that is going to say yes or no. We're going to need a lot of drop downs throughout this. So instead of just manually creating a drop down, I'm going to use some PHP. So I'm going to open up PHP. And in here, I'm going to create an array called values. And this is going to store all the possible values in our dropdown. Right. Then for each option in that array, I want to create an option. So I can open up my select up here. We'll call this active. And I will close that after our PHP tags. Then I'm going to loop through my array using a for each loop. And inside here, I'm going to echo out each option. And let's just test that out so far. So if I click add user, so we get our form elements and my yes no dropdown. So far so good. And then our last item is our submit button. And if I refresh and fill it out, and click add, we should get a new user. So we just need to add the code that actually takes those form items, that form data we provided, and adds it into the database. So similar to our login process, up at the top of our page, after our secure, but before our header, we're going to check to see if the form has been submitted. And we can check that by just seeing if a first name post value exists. So if it does exist, we can now add that record to our database. Now again, to keep this basic and focused, we're not going to worry about validation. We're just going to assume the data is good, and let's just add our record. So I'm going to create a query, insert into users. So I want to populate my users table with a first name, a last name, an email address, a password, and a status in our active column. Now I want to fill those with the first name from our form, the last name from our form, the email address from our form, and the password from our form. Now remember, our password we want to encrypt. So before we add it into our database, we want to encrypt it. And then lastly, our status, which is called active. Then after this, we can execute our query. Remember my connection variable this time, use our query variable. We can set a message. And redirect our user back to our user list. Now, before I do that, I'm going to comment this redirect out. So if I get a message that I want to see, the redirect will commenting out that redirect will allow me to see that message. So let's fill it out. So if I click add user, all right, so we have some errors. So first of all, I spelled post wrong here and here. So I can save and refresh. All right, on line 25. Oh, sorry, that should not be a dot, but a comma. And refresh. Okay, no error messages. So now if I zip over to my database, and there's my new user into my database. All right, now we can take our redirect and put it back in. And now if I go back and refresh, right, we have now 2 Toms. We have a message informing us that our user has been added, and now I can test out my delete. Right, so after the secure, but before the header, I'm going to check to see if delete exists in our URL, and if it does, I'm going to run a basic query. Delete from users where ID equals, and we'll just put a limit 1 on there just to make sure we only delete 1 record. Then we can execute that query. Redirect back to our users table, our users page. And before we do that, we want to set a message just to confirm that the delete has occurred. Oh, forgot my location header in there. So if I save that and click delete, all right, so we're getting an error on line 9. Now notice we did delete our record. However, we're getting our error on line 9. So, oh, sorry, in this line here, I want to see if that variable exists. So I'm going to add my isSet function in there. And now if I refresh, no error messages. And again, let's delete our other record here. And everything is nice and smooth. All right, and the last step in our CRUD process is to edit that record. So I'm going to create a new file called users edit. And this code is going to be very similar to the add page. So I'm going to go to the add page, copy our code, and paste it into our users edit. So we're going to have to change this to an update query. So update users set, and then we can go through and modify this query. Set first name equal to our first name form value. Set our last name equal to our last name form value. Set our email to our email form value. We'll leave out our password, so we're not going to include the password in our update. The reason we don't want to include our password is if a user is edited, we do not want to pre-populate the form with the user's password. First of all, we don't want anyone seeing that. Second of all, we don't even know their password because their password has been encrypted. the way our code is going to work is we're going to update the user with first name, last name, email, and status. Then if a password exists, if a new password has been provided, then we'll run a separate update. So I've updated here my 4 values. Now this time I need a where in my statement, where ID is equal to the ID in our URL. Then we can execute that query. Just tweak my message here. User has been updated. And then redirect back to our users. Now, before we redirect, if a new password has been provided, I'm going to run a second update. So I'm just going to copy this query, paste it in that if statement. So if a password has been provided, we're going to update users, set our password equal to the password from our form. That's the only update we're going to make in this query. And again, we need to encrypt that password before it goes into our database. All right, so there's our password code. Now down below, we just need to adjust our title to edit user. And we're going to display our form. Now, we need to go and get the user data that the visitor wants to edit. So I'm just going to run a quick select. So we'll select everything from users where ID equals the ID in our URL. Throw a limit on there because there should only be one record. Execute that query. And then fetch that record. And again, there is a lot of code in here that we could include. First of all, to make sure that the record we're trying to edit exists, that the ID in the URL is actually a number. But for now, again, just to keep it simple and focused on that whole CRUD process, let's just assume that the record exists, assume that the ID is a number, and now we can pre-populate our form with our record data. We're not going to pre-populate our password. And for our options here, options are pre-populated a little differently. So I'm going to take our option and just break it into 2 echoes, because in here, if the active value from our record is equal to the value that we're currently outputting, then I'm going to add the attribute selected to our dropdown. And now if I save, go back to my dashboard or my users list and click edit. All right, so we've got some errors to work on here. So line 63. All right, so I do not need a $sign in front of my echo. And I just noticed while I'm coding here that that quote should start before the PHP, and refresh. All right, so there's our form. Everything is pre-populated. I can't tell if the active is pre-populated, so let's just inspect element, take a quick look. So in my dropdown, notice our yes has the selected attribute. So it has been pre-populated. And now if I make a change and click edit, it says our user has been updated. However, it has not. So let's try this again. And let's debug our update query. So something is not working with our update query. So just like last time, I'm going to, first of all, let's see what our query looks like that we're trying to run. So I can save that. And another thing you can do is there is a function called MySQLi error. And this will display the last error message associated to this connection. And I want to comment out my redirect so I can see those messages. So let's make a quick change here first. Click update, and there's my error. Okay, so that's a simple error. I spelled post wrong again. There's my query. So that looks all right, except active is missing something. And this doesn't quite look right. So first, let's check out our active. Okay, that is our misspelling of post. And this has an extra equal sign. So where ID equals get ID. And let's just refresh this page. Okay, so no error. My query looks better. I also did not get a query error, so I can take those echoes out, put my header back in, and refresh. And it made an update. Now I spelled John wrong, but our code is working. And an update has been made. Okay, so that is the basic CRUD process, which is key to a content management system. You have some sort of content, in this case users, but it could be projects, articles, blog posts, photos, whatever. And you just have the ability to view the current items, add new items, update existing items, and delete existing items.